Okay, it looks like we have quorum. I want to introduce Randy, who is a sales engineer at HashMap. He has a panel of amazing engineers who are going to talk about data engineering and operations. So Randy, go ahead and take it from here.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Fivetran, and thank you, HashMap, for sponsoring this panel. I want to introduce my panelists and then jump in. And as Jason said, if you have questions throughout, please jump in. We've got a list here, but I think probably whatever the audience generates will be a little more interesting. So first, welcoming to the group, David Darden from Palmetto Solar. And then as I introduce you, you guys go ahead and turn your cameras. Hey, David. Andy Fritsch from AHTG, which is American Health Technology Group, and then Harry Hopkins from Bugle. Fellas, thanks for joining today. I wanted to start off by just going around because the modern data stack can mean kind of a lot of things. There's a lot of flexibility there. I think it would be cool, in order of how I introduced you, starting with David, what is your technology stack today, your modern data stack?
Sure. So we use a variety of tools at this point. We start off with our data loaders where we're using Stitch, Fivetran, as well as a little bit of custom Python running on Google Cloud Composer or just hosted Airflow. We are using dbt for our data transformation, landing everything on Snowflake, running on the Google Cloud, and then using Tableau Online to visualize everything and get it to our end users.
Great, Andy?
Yeah, so we have some similar technologies. We're ingesting relational data with Stitch, loading that data into Snowflake, which is actually running on the Azure cloud. And then data transformation is happening with dbt. And for analytics, Power BI. And some of that is just Power BI as the service. And we also have embedded analytics in custom applications.
Great. And Harry? Harry, I think you're on mute, bud. There he is.
Thank you. So we've got similar technology. I think where there is overlap is in the usage of Snowflake and dbt. We're actually in the Amazon cloud. We're currently using Matillion as our data replication tool, and then utilizing the cloud for our API layer and all the other various services for our clients. So.
Okay. And I think something interesting here with this group, like from my side, I use a mix of everything. So I work in consulting. My preference is to do the Fivetran, Snowflake, and dbt mix. But I've had to get on-prem now and again, right? And I think we've all had that experience in the past of working with maybe not as great of tools as we have today. So I wanted to also, just an open discussion, what first sparked your interest or give you the opportunity to, I don't know, use a modern data stack approach? Maybe Andy, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so Randy, you're absolutely right. So my background, I've been working in IT for 16 or so years, and I've done a lot of data movement type stuff, and used a lot of the more traditional ETL technologies like Informatica, and done large scale warehouse design and implementation. And the thing that my experience working on those, and of course I was in large enterprise scale companies where things don't always move very quickly, but generally the tooling was challenging to use and did not provide a great developer experience. You had to think through a lot more of the infrastructure concerns and scaling concerns and that sort of thing. So what attracted me to these tools, these more modern data stack tools, is I believe that we've entered this sweet spot in history where the cloud tools have matured enough and are integrated enough to where they become true accelerators for small teams. And right now I'm working on a very small team. I need to be able to do a lot of stuff. And they're also first-class citizens in a DevOps world. And so that's the main reason is you can control you don't have to worry so much about infrastructure and scaling. They auto scale, having auto scaling compute, and being able to write code, write your processes, observing the principles and values of a software developer as you write ELT code. That's a really important thing for me.
So Harry, does that sound like a familiar story to you? Do you recognize some components of that in your own story?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of overlap there. I think what when I look at it from a skill set and a resourcing standpoint, a lot of the cloud marketing bullet points to me translate into resources, right? So I can bring on Snowflake without needing to necessarily bring on DBAs, right? Or I don't have to bring on infrastructure and DevOps, right? So, you know, being in somewhat of a similar situation as Andy, you're always trying to balance what gives me momentum in order to be able to focus on what really is our core expertise. We develop analytics software specifically around medical and healthcare billing. We don't do ELT. We're not writing ELT software, right? That's not our core. And so whatever can keep us focused on our core the most, then that's where we're going to increase our value in our products versus trying to just be everything in a technology stack.
I really like that point about this is not my core business. And I remember 2017, I was at a Spark conference and Spotify was talking. And I really enjoy hearing about them. I was a big data developer at the time, and they had massive Hadoop infrastructure, and they had semi-recently moved to Google Cloud. And people were like, why would you do that? You had all this invested on-prem, and it was the simplest answer in the world. In a huge technical conference, infrastructure is not a competitive advantage. And that was the beginning and the end of it. So David, I wanted to ask you about this because I think, I'm not really sure. Do you have a similar experience as Andy and Harry coming to Modern, or have you often been in the cloud space throughout your career?
I absolutely have a similar experience. And if you go back a few years ago, you had a lot more to worry about just with data gravity, where everything was generated on-prem. And if you're trying to move things around, it was a little bit more problematic. I view it the same way, though, that what you're really looking to optimize is the time for you and your team and focusing on those core things that you can deliver. And it's usually not maintaining a server or infrastructure. The other thing that I would add that's a real driver is, again, the ability to use good modern engineering practices, because that gives you so much of a safety net in terms of being able to move really, really quickly with a high degree of confidence and making sure that you're not causing damage, you're not making mistakes, but you can just iterate and deliver just really a lot faster than you used to be. You need to turn things around in hours, not days or weeks.
You know, David, that's interesting. Let me zoom in on that a little bit. Can you give an example of what you would consider like a software engineering practice that you've adopted in a modern data stack context?
Absolutely. So something like using continuous integration and continuously running what you're doing. So as an example, just yesterday, we're adding things to the data warehouse. You have people that are going through, making changes, getting a quick review, pushing it into Git. As soon as it gets merged in and goes into one of the lower environments, it's automatically run, it's tested, it's validated. And as soon as you have that, you're automatically running all of your data tests. You know that you haven't broken anything, and then it just immediately gets pushed out to production and it's there. So it's a matter of, like in that case, it was a small change, so a matter of minutes with high confidence. Even if something did happen to break, it would get caught by one of the tests. If it didn't get caught by a test, you're using a blue-green deployment in production. So you automatically have a good version that should something go wrong and it doesn't fail the test, you just swap it back and while you figure it out and users don't notice anything.
Okay. And I really like hearing these stories because I think everyone has their own personal flavor of what they like best about this data engineering advancement, right? And when I'm hearing you talk, I'm wanting to understand when you're adopting this, right? There's still kind of a lot of challenges. We talked about the barriers dropping to entry for here, but I think we all know like the one thing that was the hardest for us. I know one question I like to ask people is, if you lost your warehouse infrastructure today, how much effort would it take for you to get it back? And in many cases, we couldn't get it back. We'd be starting from scratch. The people who built it are gone. The understanding of why these views exist, that doesn't live anywhere. Where in a modern data set context, well, we just wait for it to rebuild. Like that's what we would do. It might even rebuild itself and notice things went bad. So I wanted to go around and ask, when you're thinking about adopting these practices, what was the biggest bottleneck or personal growth area for you to learn these tools? Did you want to start, Harry?
Yeah, but let me, in terms of what was the bottleneck in terms of adoption?
Yeah, I guess for you personally, what was the hardest thing about adopting a modern data stack?
So I think that the impact that a modern data stack can make based upon a decision, right? So it can go good and it could go bad. I think that's one of the powers of the cloud is that it scales good and bad decisions, right? But it just scales. So I think in terms of adoption, it was how do we make it small enough to be able to test in POC, but big enough to make it impactful, right? To be able to actually measure something worthwhile. Getting to that, if it's an engineering problem, is easy, but in a lot of these cases, because we're in analytics, that requires us to actually involve multiple teams, and it's involving the business, right? So then once you get that done, you got to find the right partner. And I know we've had a lot of conversations around this. Finding the right partner, to me, is probably the most critical piece, because you just can't afford to make all the mistakes on your own, and really you can't afford the time, right? So you got to find a partner that's going to give you good momentum and acceleration to the point where you can then take over and start customizing and really maturing it to really fit your needs.
Yeah.
So.
I think when I hear you got to find a really good partner, which of course I agree with. To me, when I'm on the other side of that, it's still too hard to do it yourself all the way through.
It's impossible
to glue it together. And so I'm thinking, when I adopted these approaches, for me, it was a big learning curve to learn about like provisioning servers to like stand up to get the networking rules right, and then to have that automation actually run. I don't know how many people here have had to actually manually set up the actual the deployment process for like installing the right versions of things for DBT specifically, get pip installed, install DBT, have it run and execute in a reasonable amount of time, and not like get in trouble for spending too much. That was a learning space for me.
Sure.
Andy, did you have something similar when you were adopting, where it's a piece of technology that was maybe intimidating, or
Sure.
a part that you think could be made a little easier for people?
Yeah, well, I probably have a different spin on it, but first I want to echo what Harry was saying about finding a good partner, because to me, that's really key. I think moving from an on-prem traditional type of space into the cloud is inherently a difficult transition. And moving to the cloud in general, there's a lot to learn. There's a steep learning curve, and finding a partner is just good business, because it's an accelerator. It just speeds you to your goal, and you're not getting paid. None of us are getting paid to necessarily learn. We're getting paid to deliver. And so getting to that target faster is better. But for me, the bottleneck, part of what I said earlier about being in this historical sweet spot, yes, there's a learning curve to the cloud, but I think tools like DBT actually help that transition, because a tool like DBT, you're taking skills of being able to write SQL, and you're translating what you already know into an ELT or a data transformation package that works with what you already know. And so it makes that transition a little bit easier and faster. And of course, there are things that you have to learn, but finding key tools like that, or Stitch or Fivetran, that just make it easy to connect to data sources and pull them in to your cloud warehouse, those are the things you want to look for.
I really agree with what you're saying there, and especially the DBT component. I so frequently hear people tell me like the most impactful thing I've done in the last 12, 24 months is integrate DBT in my project.
Yeah, Randy, I almost want to challenge the framing of that question, because I don't think the bottleneck was on adoption. I think the bottleneck already existed, and then that's what gave us the motivation to look elsewhere for solutions. Like, we already inherently had bottlenecks in our current stacks that we needed to find.
And I think that's true. Like, we don't move to an area of higher difficulty on purpose, right? And this is an intentional. I don't think many people are stumbling their way and falling on accident into a modern data stack. It's a lot of work right now. But I know along the way, something like Fivetran, which I would say anyway, whether they're here or not, that's a plug and play solution where getting GitOps up and running, man, I have the branch, I have the PR, like that can still be a bottleneck. Where in the old days, maybe an on-prem warehouse, I should be doing this, but I'm not, and things are fine, but they're not fine. But that point well taken, right? That we have new challenges in this new space. And David, I want to ask you about your thoughts on this. You fall in the same kind of places kind of Harry is thinking, or did you have like a specific technology that you found to be really hairy in your stack? David.
Yeah, so we actually had a little bit of a different situation.
Okay.
So I'm at a startup. We're doing clean energy. It's a new team and building a greenfield data warehouse. So we started off, we didn't use any partners. We had a team of about 2.5 people and started going through the POC process with the Stitch, DBT, Snowflake, all of that. And we were able to build a vertical slice, and which is, I think, a key thing of delivering this in just a couple of weeks. So going from there's nothing there, there are no data sources, there's no infrastructure. It took about 2 weeks to get the first data source and a first subject area built out, delivered into our users' hands. And so all of that, I think it is very key to make sure that you have the right skill set, or you're involving the right people on the team that know what these practices are and look like. And if you don't have that, that's no problem. Bring in somebody that does and don't fight against it. As well as just making sure you're standardizing and cleaning up your practices really, really rapidly as you go. So doing that, do it and recommit to refactoring early and often, so you just incorporate those learnings and have a better base to build on.
I want to share. Can I share on that as well?
Yeah, please. No, go ahead.
My experience was pretty much the same. So I'm also currently working at a small startup where we were building a cloud data warehouse from scratch, and we were able to get, these tools are new. They are sometimes challenging, but we were able to get the first version of that warehouse in a production type of environment within 3 weeks or so to get the first version there. And that's with continuous integration. That's with automated testing. That's with pipelines that deploy it between environments. And so there's a lot you can do in a very short amount of time by putting these tools to work.
I like those notes, and something that David said really struck me about using the right technologies and really leaning into that. There's a spectrum there, right? Where it's easy in retrospect to say like, okay, Snowflake's the cloud data warehouse, but was that clear in 2015? And I'm thinking about what things right now. How do you personally, as people who can make technical decisions and incorporate new technologies in your stack, how do you strike that balance between something that's ready to go right now and something that's really interesting, but maybe isn't quite baked? And I want this to be maybe more of an open discussion.
So for me, one of the ways that I view this is it's like cutting edge versus bleeding edge, and exactly where you are in the hype curve. Because if it's brand new, everybody says it's great and nobody can quote any issues with it or point out what the downfalls are of that technology, it is probably not ready to go yet. And you can stub your toe a lot on that, particularly if you spend a lot of time and effort ramping up with it just to find out whether it's going to work or not, and particularly before you can do, again, that vertical slice of filling your use case all the way through to the end.
Right. So I tend to look at in a lot of the same ways as David, as far as when's the right time to adopt, right? And so when I look at it, and I'm going to use Snowflake as for instance, right? Most technology is really a layer on previous successes, right? So Snowflake doesn't exist if AWS and Google Cloud and all of that doesn't exist. Well, they don't exist unless, Linux, right, was not so ubiquitous and successful. So I think when you look at it, you got to see, well, what are they layered on top of? Because, they may have adoption on the current product, but if what's running underneath it is becoming legacy, or potentially is no longer going to be supported, well, then you're going to eventually inherit that. It's just not showing on the latest layer you can see. So like Snowflake was an easier decision because you could already see the maturity of the cloud services that it's sitting on top of. And then the actual, I guess, the columnar data model, right, that it derived from. But again, I'm probably not on the bleeding edge. We're in healthcare, right? So we have certain cultures around stability and security that allows us to, be innovative, but we also have to be pretty discerning about our technology choices.
Gotcha. Andy, where do you fall on this spectrum?
Yeah, I think the other two guys that have mentioned some really good things, and I think what I would add to that is, I think to discern the best technology stack for your problem, it requires all of that, but it also requires your own natural curiosity to go explore and to try and learn about new things and to try them out. It involves a little bit of luck. And I think importantly, it really is beneficial to have a good partner. And I'm just going to say that again, because, a solution implementation partner they have blazed those trails. If they're a good partner, they have tried things, they failed at it, and they've tried and succeeded. And so it's a way of outsourcing some of your thought process to a trusted partner that really helps to mitigate the risk of making the wrong decision.
Absolutely. So thinking about the steps we took along the way, the mistakes we all make, maybe they're not mistakes, but they're learning opportunities, right? I'm seeing some really great questions in the chat, and I wanted to collapse one about regrets, and to just open it up. Looking back, is there a single thing that you think, man, I could have saved a lot of time if I would have zigged instead of zagged? Anyone have something like that come to mind?
I mean, we learned the hard way about setting proper budgets and resource monitoring.
Yeah. Did you have an overrun?
Oh yeah. And like that was one of those lessons. Now, thankfully we did catch it, right? But it's one of those lessons where you learn like the cloud's its foundational value is it scales decisions very rapidly, good and bad. So it's kind of neutral about whether or not it's a good or bad thing. It just scales it. So, I regret that. I don't know if that's just a regret. That was more of a learning experience. I mean, you got to learn those things, right? But I think the only regret that I have is that, maybe didn't start sooner.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's always, but I think that's a natural regret. But, I would say, yes, what we're doing now was not developed in 2020.
Adding on to that thought, I think I have a regret personally I think to this day, I'm still dealing with the consequences of, and that is specifically in Snowflake, not really taking the time to understand roles appropriately when I first set things up. Because just move fast, it's flexible, and it is flexible. But I have legacy stuff that I'm embarrassed when people see it. It's like, why is it that way? Man, because I don't want to fix it. And it's kind of okay now, but all the future stuff is different. So that was a learning for me. It's like, take the time to understand those.
Yeah, mine is kind of similar. My top of mind regret is really dealing with technical debt. And it's really not a unique problem to this, modern cloud stack. It's just kind of building stuff in general. Is really from day one of whatever you're building, really focus on the drive principle. Don't repeat yourself. Focus on ways to automate things. If you have manual parts of the process, I had slices of my process that required manual effort repeatedly, right? And I took longer than I really should have to refactor those things into more template-based, repeatable, reusable units of code, right? And so the more you can do that, the more powerful you become. Now, of course, there is the downside, like what Harry mentioned, just like scaling in the cloud scales out your bad decisions. If you don't do this refactoring well, it scales, the consequences of failure magnify. But
Right.
that's what came to my mind.
I'm going to go with not connecting to some of the groups like the DBT Slack community sooner. It took me a little while to find that, and it was so helpful. You can get people that'll just help answer anything, and it really speeds up the process a lot.
Yeah, I would say even if you're not a DBT user today and it's not really in your roadmap, take the time to get dbt.com, like get that Slack going, because everyone is so helpful and cheery and wholesome. Like, it's my favorite part of the internet. Anyway, coming up to the end here, fellas, I want to end on a fun note. There were a ton of good questions in the chat, and I overestimated my ability to get them in. But ending on the last one, if you weren't in tech, you could be doing anything. What would you be doing? Andy, you want to kick it off?
I'd probably be working for SpaceX.
Oh,
Doing
nice.
something with that. I find that the adventure aspect of what Musk is doing with exploration of the solar system and improving that technology is really compelling.
Awesome. Harry?
Probably teaching.
Teaching? Oh, man. I was going to say teaching too. Yeah, I think that would be really fun. And then David?
Scuba diving instructor, and a little bit of both of those, teaching somebody, helping people find a whole new world to explore, and being outside a little bit more than I am these days.
Okay, I think we can all benefit from that. Well, anyway, thank you all for joining the panel today. I really appreciated your time and your insights. And again, thank you to the audience for joining. One thing I wanted to personally bring up is that a lot of the recruiting for this happened by me. And one thing that I've noticed is I recruited a lot of people that look like me. So in the future, if I were to look at this again, I would diversify a little bit. But thank you, fellas, for coming in. And I'll hand it back over to Five Train.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I just had a whole new world from what's that Disney movie? Whole New World. Go through. Oh yeah, Aladdin. When David was talking about exposing people to new things. So awesome. Thanks so much. This has been fantastic. Great panel, good perspectives, lots of chat. So hopefully, Randy, maybe we can do a blog post and get some of these questions. So at this point, we are going to have a short message from some of our sponsors, and then we're going to be welcoming Taylor Brown, who is going to come on with some closing remarks. So do me a favor, watch these videos and then stay on so that we can close it out with Taylor Brown. Thank you.
At HashMap, we work together with you to make data engineering actionable, innovative, and exciting. HashMap is a vendor-neutral consulting partner and solution integrator. We accelerate digital transformation and insights across 20 different industries with smart and sustainable data and cloud solutions and services. Our technical experts provide the exact framework and expertise you need to accelerate your data and cloud initiatives and power your profitability. We've even built a variety of open source utilities and solution accelerators for anyone to use. Let's get data and cloud done together. Visit hashmapinc.com/5tran-reach out.
Once upon a time, in a country known for its fine art and architecture, two boys were born, Benoit and Thierry.
You know, Thierry, I love data and I love computer science.
Me too.
Not only did Thierry and Benoit love big data, but they grew pretty fond of each other.
And I think you would call it a bromance.
Benoit was given the opportunity by an early investor to re-architect a data warehouse in the cloud entirely from scratch.
And I knew that there was no way I could build Snowflake on my own, so I needed Thierry because together we have amazing idea and he's the most optimistic guy I know.
They decided to quit their jobs, buy a printer, whiteboard, and start working out of Benoit's apartment in San Mateo.
So basically we propose a brand new architecture for the cloud It is an architecture which is designed to support fault isolation, performance isolation, and elasticity of the cloud.
So what we wanted to do is to build a system that would adapt, the resources that was used based on the demand, such that for customers they would only pay for what they use, and also so that the system would scale to infinity.
Yeah, what he says.
So that's the story of how two people with a shared passion for data built a cloud data platform from scratch that changed the world.
Or at least change how we store and analyze enormous amounts of data.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again for joining. And now let's welcome Mr. Brown for some closing comments.
Thanks so much, Jason. I can't believe that it's already over. I mean, this conference went so fast over the last day and a half, but I have to say that I really love the talks and the amount of different ways that folks are solving problems with the modern data stack. I also just really love the executive panel that George ran this morning. I thought it was a good, healthy discussion around the future of data warehouses and data lakes. I think in general, though, the modern data stack was definitely a success, in my opinion. So a few successful stats, I will say. We had a total registered number of sessions. We had over 4,000. We had around 926 unique emails. We had 4,500 total attendee sessions, and we had over 2,800 registrants. So definitely a success in terms of bringing a lot of individuals together to talk about the modern data stack. I want to give one last final thank you, first and foremost, to the speakers. Really appreciate everyone who spent the time to put together great material and talk everyone through the challenges that they're facing and the ways that they're using the modern data stack. Secondly, I want to appreciate all of our sponsors. We could not have done this without everyone coming together and really doing this team effort. Last, I want to appreciate the attendees for all the good questions, time, feedback, and just interaction. This is really what makes the conference so exciting. And then actually, very last, I want to thank the Fivetran team, especially Chris and Annie and Jason, who really spearheaded this whole project. Jason did a great job of emceeing the event, and the rest of the marketing team. So with that, I'm looking forward to seeing you all at the next Modern Data Stack conference next year. So thank you. Looking forward to it. All right.